Our next cycle from the 4 cycles that we'll talk about today is the phosphorus cycle. Maybe a little lesser known cycle than the water cycle. There are a couple things to keep in mind when we talk about the phosphorus cycle. One being that the phosphorus cycle does not touch the atmosphere, so unlike the water cycle, it is not a part of all of the different spheres of the Earth. It is a part of the biosphere, the geosphere, and the hydrosphere, and it cycles between these spheres through a couple of processes that we'll talk about now. So phosphorus begins as a mineral found in rocks, or an element found in rocks. Minerals are made up of different elements, and then rocks are made up of different minerals. So as we break these rocks down through weathering and erosion, weathering being the breakdown of rocks and erosion being the transport of rocks, they are going to release phosphorus, among other things. So this would be the primary source, rocks. Once rocks break down, they become part of the hydrosphere and the waterways, and eventually this small sediment settles into water bodies, so we can have an accumulation of phosphorus in our water systems. Some will be returned to rocks as we form new rocks through some more complex geologic processes that we haven't gotten to yet. Some is going to be used by plants that take in phosphorus from soils and from water. And then animals will eat these plants, and that is how they will take in their phosphorus. Once animals and plants die and decompose, phosphorus is going to be returned to the earth, and it will become part of the soil and possibly later part of new rocks in, again, some of those more complex geologic processes that we'll talk about later in the year. But for now, I want you to understand that phosphorus is introduced through the weathering of rocks, breaking them down. It will become part of the water system, the hydrosphere. It can also become part of the soil. We have leaching of phosphorus from the soil into water bodies, but it can work both ways. And we're going to have the absorption by plants, and then the absorption by animals that eat the plants. And decomposers are going to work to break down dead plants and dead organisms, and they'll be able to return the phosphorus to the soils, to the geosphere. All in all, this is a very slow process. If you can imagine, the breaking down of rocks takes a lot of time. However, humans have sped up the process in some ways by harvesting phosphorus and turning it into fertilizers by using phosphates in fertilizer. Spraying that fertilizer over fields, some is absorbed by the plants that we're growing, and some is going to be washed away as excess fertilizer and then become part of our water system. In this way, we can end up with too much phosphorus in the water, which can be detrimental to the ecosystems, these aquatic ecosystems, because phosphorus is going to be used by algae that could produce an algal bloom. And what that does is it's going to remove nutrients from the water as the algae builds and builds. It's also going to starve the water of sunlight as it creates kind of that thick layer over top of the water, which is going to harm any photosynthesizers that are in the pond or lake, keeping it healthy. So eventually it could lead to eutrophication, which would actually kill most organisms in the water. So it's something that it's good to keep an eye on, monitoring phosphorus levels in our water systems.